So, the story of Ruth, we've been in it for a couple of weeks. We've done the first two chapters, and today we're going to be on to chapter 3 together. As always, I'm just going to read through the story. It is a story, and so we're going to read it together and take it in together. So far in the story, if you remember, there's a lady called Naomi who has a husband who moves her and a family out of God's land, Israel, and into a foreign country. There, her husband dies, her 2 sons die, and she's left with her 2 daughters-in-law, and they're starving. And they hear that there's food back in their homeland, so they decide to go back. One of the daughters leaves, but Naomi, have I got it right? I said the other week I'm going to get confused. Ruth, the daughter, goes with them. And heads back to the land. So that was the first chapter, and they head back to this place where they hear this bread. In the second chapter, we saw that God's kind of working behind the scenes. He's not really mentioned in the book of Ruth as acting in it, but there's all these little clues. It just so happens that Ruth ends up in this field, and it just so happens that it's the field of a man called Boaz, and it just so happens that Boaz is a nice kind of guy, and it just so happens he notices Ruth, and it just so happens that he, it turns out, is her kinsman redeemer, her guardian redeemer, the one in that culture who would marry into the family to rescue them from poverty, to redeem them, to take on their debt, to look after them, to give them a new start and a new hope. And that's where the chapter ended. But it ended at the end of the barley season. Ruth's been working for Boaz. She's been collecting in food with him. But it says that the barley harvest is coming to an end. And so the problems are about to rise up again. Their supply of food is about to stop. Their safety and their security is about to end. And that's how we enter into chapter 3. It says, one day, Ruth's mother-in-law Naomi said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you, where you'll be well provided for. Now Boaz, with whose women you have worked, is a relative of ours. Tonight he will be winnowing barley in the threshing floor. Wash, put on perfume, and get dressed in your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know that you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying, then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do." "I will do whatever you say," Ruth answered. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. When Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet and lay down. In the middle of the night, something startled the man. He turned, and there was a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am your servant Ruth," she said. "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family." "The Lord bless you, my daughter," he replied. "This kindness is greater than that which you have showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character. Although it is true that I am a guardian redeemer of our family, there is another who is more closely related than I. Stay here for the night. And in the morning, if he wants to do his duty as your guardian redeemer, good, let him redeem you. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until morning." So she lay at his feet until morning, but got up before anyone could be recognized. And he said, "No one must know that a woman came to the threshing floor." He also said, "Bring me the shawl that you are wearing and hold it out." When she did so, he poured in 6 measures of barley and placed the bundle on her. Then he went back to town. When Ruth came to her mother-in-law, Naomi asked, "How did it go, my daughter?" Then she told her everything Boaz had done for her, and added, "He gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying, 'Don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed.' Then Naomi said, 'Wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens, for the man will not rest until this matter is settled today.'" I'm a bit worried for you today. I read a statistic that there are 367 people each year who are admitted to A&E due to injury sustained in church services. I don't know if that's the preacher getting carried away, throwing a Bible out there, or people getting carried away in worship and pulling a muscle, or choking on communion. I can't imagine what they may be. But you are in danger today. This is not a risk-free environment. And when you go home, it isn't much safer there either. You could go home and say, right, I'll stay at home and put my feet up. But apparently 37,000 people are treated for accidents each year involving their slippers. So you're no safer there. I looked up some more of these. There's 59 people who are injured each year by blue tack. 19 people last year died believing that Christmas decorations were chocolate. 101 people have broken parts of plastic toys pulled out of their soles of their feet. 18 Brits each year have serious burns trying on a new jumper with a lit cigarette in their mouth. 543 went to A&E after opening bottles with their teeth. 5 were injured in accidents involving out-of-control Scalextric cars. The World Cup's on. Apparently 800,000 people get injured each year trying to copy their sporting heroes and suffer for it. 96,000 were injured in their sleep. 117 people were hospitalised by cricket stumps. And 1,543 people had to have hospital treatment for accidents involving toilet paper. Nowhere is safe. And so we need to be careful today. So, yeah, that's in the millions. We're not safe. Last week, we saw this part of the story where it just so happens God is at work to try and redeem Ruth, to rescue Naomi, to turn their fortunes around, and God is at work. And we kind of focused on that aspect, that when we see it or not, God is at work. He is doing something. He is up to something. We don't always recognize it, but as we look back, we kind of go, it just so happened. I was in the right place at the right time. And then there's this thing that goes on in my head, maybe it goes on in yours. You go, great, that means there's hope, that means there's future, that means things can be better, things can be turned around. So when's it going to happen? It's all very well, God works good in all things and God brings good out of things, but Dean, right now, everything is still the same. Talk about having this hope that things might be different, but hope kills you. That's why the World Cup, every single time, it's the hope that kills you. If we didn't expect anything, and we always go, oh, we don't really expect England to do well, or Wales, sorry, to do Wales. You have this expectation, but if you didn't have that expectation, then it's all good, because it doesn't really matter. But something in us goes, maybe, and it's the hope that kills us. And that happens in life. Just don't have any expectations, and you won't be disappointed. Expect nothing, and then you can lose nothing. It's an effort to have hope. But the alternative is equally scary. It's kind of this leprosy of our souls. Leprosy, often the picture is that it's sort of a body that's falling apart or decaying. In fact, leprosy is a numbing of the nerves where you can't feel and you can't, when you touch things, you don't realize it. So you hit your hand and your body doesn't recognize it, so it doesn't heal itself. Or you put your hand on a hot stove and it burns it. And that's where the decay of the body comes about. It's not recognizing that it's in jeopardy. And that's what happens to us. We stop feeling things, we stop recognizing things, and we get this, our body stops registering it, and that's just as bad as the danger that we're in. And that's where we come to in Ruth. That all this thing's going to happen, that they might get redeemed, Boaz might be the one to save them. They've heard he's their kinsman redeemer. It's all very well and good. He's looked after them, he's protected them, but now what? Because all of that's coming to an end. All of that is about to stop. And Boaz hasn't seemed to get the hints or taken any initiative in this matter. And it's over now to Ruth and to Naomi to do something about it. Last time was all about what God does and how he works and how he creates hope and stirs up opportunity. And this chapter is all about how we need to seize it, how we need to take hold of that which God brings into our life, how we need to see it in front of us and work to take hold of it, and also the risk that involves. You see, Naomi goes, and it's a bit of a weird bit of the story. They have this idea, you're going to go to the threshing floor, you're going to find him, you're going to uncover his feet. In that culture, from what I understand, there's all sorts of interpretations, but from what I understand, it's a sign of submission. The servants would sit at the feet of the bed of the master, and so she's going, and I don't know if that's to wake him up or what it is, but it's kind of uncovering the feet, sitting at his feet, lying there is an act of submission. I'm giving my life to you. I'm submitting to you. I'm putting myself in your hands. I'm at your mercy, if you like. But that is a dangerous thing to do. And in the story, you see that it's dangerous. Boaz could reject her. He could simply say, no, I want nothing to do with this. He could mock her, accuse her, could even take advantage of her. The story's already said that she's not safe in other fields because other people might take advantage of her. And she's putting herself in this vulnerable position. She could be humiliated by him. She could be abused. She could lose all of her protection. If Boaz takes it the wrong way, he could cast her away and kick her out. They could lose their protection and the life that they've managed to fashion for themselves. She could be cast out, and her reputation in other places could be ruined. That results in her having to live a life of prostitution of being subject to the whims of other men and all that entails, one way or another, her relationship will be changed, for better or worse. It is a massive risk that she takes. If someone else sees it, even if Boaz wants to take her as the redeemer, if someone else notices, then suddenly rumours start and gossip starts and Boaz's reputations get dragged through the mud. This woman snuck in. Do you see her sneaking out this morning? The walk of shame, that this woman who's come in and now she's sneaking out. What's going on there? I thought he was a decent man, and now look what's going on. Ruth, as we know, is also a Moabite. She isn't part of the people, and so her coming to it's fraught with danger. There is so much risk here, but it seems it's a risk that they are willing to take. And our faith often requires a risk. It was John Wimber who said that faith is spelled R-I-S-K. We know that God is our Redeemer. We are grateful for his provision. We're glad he treats us kindly and protects us. We know that he's our hope, but we've come to a point that we realize unless we take action, unless we grab hold of that hope, unless we take the window of opportunity that we have, all the redemption, all the saving, all the healing, all the things that he provides never materialize in our lives. And the next step for all of us requires us to take a risk. Jesus is really clear on this. In church, we like to say, gospel's free, you come as you are, there's no barrier between you and God. Today, if you want to call on him, you can. And that's kind of our rhetoric, and it's got truth in it. And then you read Jesus, he goes, okay, if you want to follow me, you've got to pick up a cross and you've got to follow me. If you're going to follow me, you've got to count the cost. If you were to build a tower, you'd sit down and you'd count it out before you did so. If you're going to fight a war and 10,000 people were coming at you, you'd make sure you had an army to fight back. You'd make sure that you could win before you engaged in war. And then he says, you need to do the same. You need to count the cost because there is a risk in your faith. There is a risk in choosing Jesus. And you go, well, that doesn't sound very... Why can't you just get rid of the risk? Why does risk have to be a part of it? Well, risk, as we've already seen, is a part of everything. You're at risk today. There's some real weirdos in this church. You might get stuck in a conversation. They even give a microphone to some of them. You're at risk. Risk is everywhere. It's a part of life. And we live in a culture where we try and minimize risk. We try and eliminate risk. We try and make things as safe as possible. We do reviews and studies and safeguarding and all these things to try and eliminate as much risk. And that's all fine and good. But it creates this idea that we can create a place that is completely risk-free or a life that is completely risk-free. There is a risk in what Ruth is about to do, but there's also a risk if she does nothing. She risks starving to death. She risks being alone for the rest of her life. She risks missing out on the redemption that's there. Following Jesus is a risk, but so is not following. Loving others is a risk, but so is shutting yourself off and saying, I want nothing to do with anyone else. Faith in Jesus is never meant to be understood as an event we come to where we sing it, say it, pray it, and go home to our nice safe places. That results in this kind of anemic faith that doesn't have any strength, doesn't have any power. And what the gospel that Jesus gives us says, there is a risk, but there is also a reward. To be a disciple of Jesus means learning to do what he calls us to do, knowing that there may be a cost. But there is a reward as well. Risk is necessary because risk is how we grow. There's a poem, I don't know if it's a poem or a saying, but it said this: to laugh is to risk appearing the fool. To weep is to risk being called sentimental. To reach out to another is to risk involvement. To expose feelings is to risk showing your true self. To place your ideas and your dreams before a crowd is to risk being called naive. To love is to risk not being loved in return. To live is to risk dying, and to try is to risk failure. But it says risks must be taken, because the greatest risk in life is to risk nothing. The person who risks nothing does nothing, has nothing, and becomes nothing. They may avoid suffering and sorrow, but they simply cannot learn, cannot feel, cannot change, cannot grow or love. Chained by their certitude, they are a slave. They have forfeited their freedom. Only the person who risks is truly free. Chained by your certitude. Chained by I have to have everything lined up and everything worked out and every problem solved and every option covered. Chained by that so that we end up doing nothing. And Jesus invites us to risk. He says, yes, there is a cost. I want you to be aware that there's a cost. I want you to be aware that it may take something, that you may lose something. It may change something. It may shift you into a new season or a new way of doing things. I want you to be aware of that. There is a risk, but it's the only way to real growth. It's a part of discovering how to obey your calling. You've heard the sermons before. There are many good reasons to get out of the boat, but all of them involve a risk. The only reason to do it is because Jesus isn't in the boat. He's out there, in the risky storm, in the risky place. But that is where he is. And it's worth going because he is the one that we're seeking. Ruth, the risk is great, but the reward is Boaz. It's because of him that she's willing to take the risk. Now, I don't know what your risk is. We often think of going to gang-controlled slums in Brazil or war-torn countries or Weatherspoons in Leinster. That might be your great risk, but in doing that, I think we then box it up and we kind of put it there and go, oh, that's for them, that's for another season, or maybe when that comes up, which it never does, but maybe when it does, then I'll have to look at that. But taking the big, bold risk may be something different. The challenge for you might be different. Perhaps it's saying to your spouse, I'm sorry, I was wrong, can we start over? It's a risk. May not get the reception that you want, but it might be the right thing to do. Maybe it's the risk of admitting you need help, or counselling, or a support group. I cannot do this on my own. It's a risk. You're being vulnerable. You're opening yourself up to rejection, to mockery, to dismissing. But it's a risk worth taking. Could it be that your risk is to admit that you were wrong and asking for forgiveness? Or is your risk to offer forgiveness to someone else? I want to be careful about that. Forgiving someone is not the same as trusting someone or letting them do it again or saying it doesn't matter. Forgiving is saying I'm letting go of my right to retaliate and to hurt you in return. But it's still a risk. Perhaps it's the risk of saying to God, I get it, I see what you want me to do, I've been running for it, but I'm ready to trust you. Maybe it's the risk of opening up your life to others, to welcome them into your home. Maybe it's the risk of stepping into someone's life, getting their dirt all over you. Maybe it's the risk of doing the right thing. Maybe it's the risk of staying where you are and not walking away from a tricky situation, which would be so much easier. But the risk of staying put, as hard as it might be. I'm not saying that you should risk for the sake of risk. We're not adrenaline junkies trying to get our fix. But doing what is right and good and loving, taking hold of the life God is bringing to you in the place that he's put you is a risk. But you should still do it. Our risks often aren't life or death. Maybe it's reputation or the opinion of others. Maybe it's the risk of being uncomfortable or giving up time or being laughed at or being whispered about. Those are real risks. And they're the things that we often struggle about. The risk may be just to say, I need you, Jesus. I've been coming along, I've heard about you, and I've realised that I need you, and I know my family are going to think I'm weird, and my friends will, and I'm not really sure myself, but that still is a risk. But it's where you take hold of what he wants to bring you. He's done everything he needs, so it just so happens you are in this place at this time, or with that person, or in that situation. That's all his work. But now it's for you to take the risk. And more than hearing a great talk or reading a great book, God grows us and challenges us as we take these risks. It increases our trust in him. And we will fail, at least by our measurement. When we take these risks, it won't always work out. I know there are super Christians here with their capes fluttering in the wind who say there's no such thing as risk because my God is in control and he will work out all things according to his purposes. You can tell that to Joseph while he sat in prison. And you can tell that to Ruth while she's on the verge of starvation. And you can tell that to Paul, who gets whipped 5 times, who gets beaten with rods 3 times, who gets pelted with stones, gets shipwrecked, spends a night and a day in the open sea, who is in danger from rivers and bandits, in danger from fellow Jews, in danger from Gentiles and in the city, who's left cold and naked. There's no risk, Paul, don't worry. There's no risk. No, there is great risk. And I know we can do a theological equation that tells you that God's in control, but in the dirt, on the ground, there is great risk. There is great risk of failure, but failure doesn't shape you. the way you respond to failure shapes you. Sometimes there's things going on inside. Jesus counts up the cost. The reason he says that is because you risk losing all those things. You risk losing some security. You risk losing reputation. You risk losing a lot of things. And he says you've got to be willing to lose that to follow. There's a risk to it. It's in danger. The gospel is free, no strings attached, but you might lose everything that you have. The point isn't that there's no risk. The point is that the benefit, the reward, the blessing, the comfort, the joy, the peace, the sheer awesomeness of knowing him outweighs the risk that you will take. And so Paul, who risked all those things, says in Philippians, whatever was gained to me, I count as loss for the sake of Christ. More than that, I count all things as loss compared to the surpassing excellence of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord, for whom I've lost all things. I consider them rubbish that I may gain Christ and be found in him. He goes on having a righteousness that surpasses. He goes on and on, but this is a man who has lost it all and goes, I now see that I've risked everything and I lost everything. By most standards, everyone's saying I failed because I've got nothing left. But the way I look at it, I've got everything that I need and more. I found the one thing that finally satisfies. I found the one thing I was made for. And everything is lost. In fact, the word is a bit ruder than that. It's manure, it's excrement. He said it doesn't mean anything to me. He's better. And that only makes sense now when I read Ruth and she goes, okay, Naomi, I understand what I've got to go there, I've got to dress myself up, I've got to get off my morning clothes for my husband, I've got to move on, I've got to go to this place, there's men all sleeping around, what if one of them notices me? I've got to lie at his feet and wait for him to wake up, and then I've got to say, you tell me what to do. I've got to completely surrender. What if something happens? What if someone wakes up? What if someone notices? What if someone sees? But what if he says yes? What if Boaz says, yes, I'll do it? So she does it because knowing him, having him is greater. And the redemption that he gives, that's an added bonus. But that's greater than all that she might lose. That's where our hope gets misplaced. Our hope is not that things will work out. Our hope is not that things will get better. Our hope is in him, who is with us even when they don't work out. That I still have him even when I lose everything else. Because if the option is that I either have him and I lose everything, or I don't have him, sorry to say, you're still going to lose everything. Still leave this life with nothing. But the things God can do when you risk your whole life to trust him. The biggest risk Ruth took was a bit earlier, where she says to Naomi, your God will be my God. Your home will be my home, your people, my people, your God will be my God. That was where the risk started. But actually, no, that's not quite right. That was where it started for her. But the first risk isn't Ruth's risk, and it's not your risk. It's not Naomi's risk. The first risk we find in the Bible is the risk that God takes. In loving us, God takes a risk. As you read through the Bible, you'll find this incredible story where God breathes life into humans, gives them the ability to know him and to walk with him. And he risks giving them the choice of making, will we live with you or will we do it by ourselves? And it's a risk of choosing a people as they rebel. And then the risk of saying, I will redeem you and I will bring you back. And the risk of binding himself to this messed up bunch of people who constantly get it wrong and worship cows rather than the living God. And the risk of saying, I will be known by you and that what you do will be a reflection of me. And the way you live will point to me. And then getting it wrong again and again and again. The risk of having his name dragged through the mud, and it does get dragged through the mud. Then there's the risk of him coming as one of us. The risk of the Christmas story where he becomes so vulnerable. Doesn't come as an adult who can defend himself. He comes as a child who kings try to exterminate and leave a wake of destruction in the path. The risk of growing up and having to learn and to wrestle with this broken world. The risk of finally announcing himself, being rejected, being mocked, being laughed at. The risk of being arrested and spat on. The risk of being slapped and degraded like a common criminal. The risk of being nailed up as a spectacle. The risk of being crucified and derided all the way. The Bible story doesn't say nothing is a risk. The Bible story is that God took a risk on us and our ability to reject him and turn away from him, but still he loved. Our ability to refuse that and to turn away from it, but still he came. Our ability to say we want nothing to do with you, we don't want to know you, and still he gave his life. It's a risk, but God counted up the cost and astoundingly deemed us worthy of the risk. How wide, how long, how high and deep is the love of God that surpasses knowledge. And for the joy set before him, the joy of children, sons and daughters coming home to the Father, for that joy he perseveres. He risks it so that we can trust him. It's this paradox in our faith. Even though faith may be risky, it brings certainty. Don't know how it works, but that's it. Faith is risky, but as we risk it, we find certainty. And I'm only willing to risk, not because things will work out, not because things will go well, or I'll get the answers I'm looking for. I'm willing to risk because he risked it first. I'm willing to trust him because he's proved himself trustworthy. I'm willing to say I haven't got it figured out, but I've counted up the cost and you still seem better, only because he has shown himself to be better and faithful and good. But to get there, you've got to get past the risk of rejection. Perhaps you think he doesn't want me. Maybe others, not me. Try him. It's a risk, I know. And the benefits far outweigh anything else. There's a risk in love. Today, maybe your risk is to say, I'm trusting you. I see that you've loved me. For what I've got and what I've got to lose, you still seem worth it. Jesus invites you to make that calculation and then to say yes. And perhaps the step you need to take. For others of you, you've made that step, but your faith is kind of stagnated. It's grown cold. One of the surefire ways to wake it back up is to take a risk. Not for the sake of it, not just to get your buzz, but to say that this is the right thing. This is what you're asking me to do. This is the place you've put me. This is the opportunity in front of me. And it is a risk to reach out, to love, to forgive, to care, to serve, to be generous. But when I do, I'm more alive. My faith is more alive than if I just make myself safe and go to the safe places and sit with the safe people and talk with safe friends and family. And so what is your risk today? Maybe it's the risk of a first step like Ruth, to come to the one who is worth it. Or it's the risk of walking in obedience to him. The risk of doing what it is he's asking you to do. In a moment, I'm simply going to pray for the Holy Spirit to communicate that to you, to impress on you what that might be, the risk that you need to take. It doesn't have to be massive. You can start small, let it build. Maybe you've got to sit in a different spot next week. It's risky. Maybe you've got to talk to someone different. Maybe there's somewhere you need to go, something you need to do. It will be risky. It will cost something. It will take something. You watch. You watch as that spark of faith that oh, he's with me. Oh, here it is. Oh, this is what life is. Starts to come alive. Starts to energize. And you watch that flame start to grow into a fire. It will take something. It will demand something. It will ask something of you. But what you'll get back will be 100 times what you could ever lose. Let me just pray for you as we close. Jesus, you're the one who asked us to count up the cost. We've often ignored that. We love that you give. We love that you are gracious. We love that you are good. And it's not that you want to take away. It's that there are things that will hold us back in trying to be safe and secure. There are things that will trap us and sap us of life. But if risk is the way that we grow, trusting you, despite the outcome, despite the difficulties, despite the obstacles, if that's how we come alive again, then today, Holy Spirit, I ask you to impress on us what you're asking us to risk. Or perhaps that's the wrong question. It's not what we're risking, it's what we're trusting. In one sense, we are risking things. We might lose something. But the flip side of that coin is that we're trusting you. We're saying we will step out because you've asked us to. We will do this because it's what you're calling us to. We will love. We will serve. We will give. We will be present. We will care. We'll step into someone's life. We'll forgive. Because it's what you're calling us to do. We can't do it all, Father. So I ask now that you would impress on us just that one thing, that one step. Give us the courage to do it until we get to the other side and we look back and say, there it is. There's the life I was looking for. There's the faith that has real power. There's the faith that really changes hearts and minds and makes a difference. Give us the courage to keep going until we get there. For those who've never taken a risk on you, and today might be their first step to hear of this God who risked it all for them. Holy Spirit, give them the ability to see that you are trustworthy, that you are good. See that love that cost you so much, and yet you were willing to pay it. That we might know you. Help each of us take that step, that risky step, but that faith-filled step for your glory. Amen. The story ends in chapter 3 with Ruth taking this risky step. She goes there, she sits at his feet, he notices her, and he says, yes, I would love to redeem you, but there is another obstacle in the way. There is another who has a greater right than I do, who is more closely related than I am. And so I will have to speak to him. The chapter ends with Naomi saying he will not settle until this matter is settled. That's next week.